Here's to the women who won't settle, the badasses, the rebels, the ones who know they deserve more, those who know how to get their worth, those who refuse to settle for mediocre careers. You can hate them or you can love them, but the one thing you can't do is ignore them. Why? Because you admire them. Welcome to Career Overhauling, and I'm your host, Olivia Jarris. This is a space where I make dream careers and dream salaries happen. Hello and welcome again to my podcast. I am honored to have you here, and as you know, I value your time enormously. I know you do too, so I'm going to make sure that the next few minutes that we spend together here, I add enormous value to your career and I make each minute count. So today I want to make sure that we deconstruct the concept of the resume. Now, if you know anything about my methodology on resumes, is that I basically think that the resume itself is dead. I prefer to think of it as a personal legend that you need to craft. Why? Because a resume is just a piece of paper, and well, I'm going to get into it a little bit, but ultimately this is why my advice is so different from what you're going to hear out there. This is why I guess my resume advice has gotten much more notice on the media than what you will find hundreds and thousands of other career counselors, resume coaches, and career coaches doing. It's different and it's unconventional, but it's going to make total sense by the time we're done here today. All right. So today I'm really going to go deeply into how you need to think about your resume rather than going into the formatting and content of it, because we're going to do that in another episode. But for right now, I really need you to change your mindset around what the resume can do for you, all right? I'm going to refer to it as a resume just because that's what you probably know it as, or like that's the actual vehicle purpose that we are going to use. But the truth is, it's so much more than that, okay? This is why in our world, at the Salary Coaching headquarters, we refer to it as the personal legend. So let me get sorted out here, get my tea going, and let's roll. All right. So first things first, the resume. You've probably been told that it matters how you format, the kind of font that you use, the kind of spacing, and keep it to one page, etc., etc. I want you to check all that advice at the door, because all of that is truthfully useless and obsolete. The reality is, when it comes down to resumes, there is no preferred format. The format is really not going to matter. What's really going to matter is what you're saying with the words, how you make people feel with your resume. And this is really the secret. This is a secret recipe that I've been using for years to get women hired at the Googles, get them hired at the Facebooks, eBays, LinkedIn's even, and all over the Fortune 500s, Fortune 1000s. This is the secret to actually getting that resume to the eyes and to have the resume open your door. Now, a resume is not the only thing that you will need to do in order to get interviewed, get hired, and we got plenty of episodes lined up with how to actually go about that. But until the resume itself is obsolete, we kind of have to take it into account, and we need to maximize it as an asset that you have in order to open doors, career doors that might not be currently open to you. So what do I mean? As I sip my tea here, the resume is, in its essence, one little tiny tool that you have at your disposal, which you can use to persuade the reader that you are the ideal candidate that they want to hire. Now, format doesn't particularly matter, and I'm going to go back to this. Why? Because have you ever heard that saying, people won't remember what you said, but they'll remember how you made them feel? Well, the same exact logic applies to resumes. People won't remember what font you used, they won't remember what format you used, and they won't even remember how you wrote it and what kind of paper you used. Well, maybe they'll remember the kind of paper. If you made them feel the way that they need to feel in their own narrative so that you can be the tool that they need in order for them to fulfill their hero's journey. Now, I know I just threw a ton right at you and you're like, what the heck is she talking about? You see, here's the thing. As humans, we love stories. We love narratives, and really the world, in our heads, operates as a narrative. But the kind of stories that we really, really like are our own story. And guess who's the hero of our own story? You guessed it. We are the hero in our own story. Like, if you think about it, the world does revolve around you, doesn't it? Right? I know my world revolves around me. We'd like to think that no, it revolves around our children's, our families, our cause, our mission. But the reality is, we are stuck in this body, we're stuck in our head, and there's no one other than our own mind with us all the time. So there's really no choice for our story to revolve around us. Hence, we are the hero, and we need to be the hero of our own narrative. What does this mean when it comes down to resumes? Well, if we can use your resume and the tools that you're presenting to this hiring manager who, let's call him Joe, all right? Let's say that Joe is the hiring manager for our story purposes, right? And Joe is looking to fulfill a role at his company, and he's hiring, and he is going to come across your resume, all right? What do we need to do in order for Joe to feel, and this is a key word, feel that you are the answer to his problems, the tool, if you will, that's going to help him solve his problems, his deep-seated problem that is the reason why this vacancy is going unfulfilled. All right? So we need to make sure that our resume is a response to his, like a direct response, a very overt response to Joe's deep-seated problem, which is the reason why this vacancy is going unfulfilled. You see, what most people tend to do is they see a job description, they see their resume, and they see a job posting, right? And they say, oh, I sort of can do these things, or I've done these things before. It's all showcased on my resume. I am gonna just tweak a few words here and there and then put it through the online portal and apply. Well, the thing is, if you just tweak a few words here and there, you might make it through the online portal application systems. And online portals or application portals are really another dying art or dying animal or whatever you want to call it. They're completely obsolete. But that again is for yet another story. If you want to get a job, I would say the first place you need to not look is through an online portal, just because as useful as they are in filtering keywords so that you have to kind of put in keywords here and there, and even if you can game the system of the keywords, the thing is, it'll land you into a pile. It won't land you in front of someone, all right? So I have strategies for you, but not in this podcast. I'm going to share them though. But my preferred methodology is always avoid the online portal unless you absolutely have to because of procedural purposes once you've already secured the actual job, right? So anyhow, let's go back to what I was talking about here. We tend to use our resumes as a bragging post for our accomplishments and list all our grandiose skills and qualifications. When if you put yourself in Joe's shoes, and let's make sure that we talk about Joe as a hero here, because Joe is in his own story, wanting to be the hero of the day and kind of end his day or his story, if you will, in a good tone or in a good note. So what Joe wants, his ultimate outcome, is to find the ideal candidate, not just a blah candidate, so that his vacancy that is going currently unfulfilled gets filled, and he is left like a hero, like the knight in shining armor that saved his team from all these problems that are going because of this vacancy going unfulfilled, and making everyone feel like, man, he totally found a diamond in the rough with that hire. Okay? So we want to help him in his hero's journey so that he can bring to the table the diamond in the rough. How do you actually do that through your resume? Well, first clue is don't make your resume a bragging post. What your resume should be doing is literally responding to Joe's need. Now, how can we figure out Joe's need? Well, first thing, there is obviously the job description and the job posting. Now, if you know much about HR, you'll know that if it's a large company and they kind of have a system going when it comes down to compensation and job postings, etc., you'll see that the job posting is going to list the key accountabilities in order of importance. So the most important accountabilities and responsibilities of the position are going to be the first few that are listed, and then it's obviously going to be formatted in whatever way the company wants to format it. But as you go down in the responsibilities, you're going to notice that they get more granular and perhaps even more specific. Now the further down you go, the less important those accountabilities are. So what I want you to do with this information that you know is listed there for your eyes, telling you literally this is the problem, this is what we're having to deal with because Joe has this vacancy unfulfilled, is what I want you to take and essentially mirror with your own words and your experience in your resume. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, if you're applying to a job that's in your industry and in your field, what you're going to notice is that you might not have direct experience. You might not have done the same job in the same industry, but you've done the job elsewhere. So say, for example, you've managed the operations line for a widget company, but you're looking at a posting that says you need to manage the operations line for pie manufacturing, or pie, I don't know that you manufacture pies, but you make pies, or pie operations processing plant or something like that. What you want to do is distill the essence of your experience fulfilling the widget's responsibility, management responsibility, and equate it to the operations of making pies and managing the operations of pie making. And with that essence, you make the point in your resume to list out that specific essence. So I'm going to go in another episode on exactly how you lay this out. Right now, I'm giving you a broad overview of how, what we're trying to accomplish here, right? But in the next episode or next podcast, I'm going to kind of tell you exactly how you list these responsibilities and your professional experience, right? But in essence, what you're trying to do is you're trying to make the hiring manager, when they come across your resume, you want to make them feel like, wow, this person gets me. This person understands what I'm going through with this vacancy, with all the stresses that I'm feeling right now because of this vacancy going unfulfilled. I think he or she is going to hit the ground running. Now, that brings me to another really important it's not a side note, it should be really like a front note, is that you only have 7 seconds to make or break the impression on your resume. You see, the way that our brain operates, we make snap initial judgments. Whether you like it or not, and whether you don't consider yourself, or you do consider yourself, a judgmental person, our mind jumps to instant conclusions based on what our initial assessment of a situation or thing is. And this is purely based on experience. So it's an experiential assessment. We assess what we see based on our internal experiences and what our kind of cultural baggage, if you will, or our institutional knowledge, whatever it is around us that has influenced our belief system. We are going to make a snap judgment. And this is why the first 7 seconds that someone spends reading your resume are so fundamental. You want to make sure that in those 7 seconds, the person that's reading your resume likes you. Why? And here's another secret. Because the way that the human mind operates, once we've made this initial snap judgment, like, I really like Olivia, I want to hire her, or no, I don't like Olivia, so I don't really get a good vibe for hiring her, what our brain is going to do is going to find information, and it's going to look for information throughout the rest of our stay on the resume to corroborate our initial impression. Why? Just because that's how our brain operates. We don't try to negate our first impression. We try to look for evidence that supports our assumptions. And this is a survival mechanism that all human beings have. Because imagine if you were back in the caveman days and you heard a noise that sounded like a tiger's roar or saber-tooth roar, and you're like naturally going to the place in your mind of saying like, oh no, that was just like a very loud bird chirping. We wouldn't have lasted very long if these kind of pieces of information triggered our counter survival system. So like countering what we were trying to survive based on, well, I don't know where I'm going with that. But basically, what I'm saying is that your brain is going to try continuously to corroborate your initial impression and try to find evidence. Why? Because it's a survival mechanism. So we need to make sure that in those first 7 seconds, you make an impression that will be positively corroborated throughout the rest of the paper. So honestly, the first 7 seconds are fundamental in them deciding whether or not they like you. So you need to make sure you take advantage of those first 7 seconds. Now, if you know about our methodologies, and we have plenty of courses and materials for you to check out, and in fact, in a couple of weeks, we're launching our new course in which you'll get a ton of stuff. You'll get our resume scripts, the ones that are actually getting people hired at the Googles, Facebooks, etc., all over the world. So we kind of have done the work for you, and you've got the courses and all the materials where I go really deeply into all of this. But what does that mean that they've got 7 seconds? Well, what it means is literally they're going to get through your name, your phone number, email, and then a little bit of what I suggest you should always have is the blurb. And in the blurb, you want to tell them about yourself in a way that severely influences their perception of you. Now, again, this is something content-wise that we're going to go into in the next session, because today we're really doing a broad overview of how you need to be thinking about your resume. So in the first 7 seconds, you're going to not manipulate. The truth is, manipulation is very different from influencing behavior. And I want to make sure that we clarify this, because manipulation will get eventually found out. In this age and day where technology is so readily available and manipulating information is always a bad idea, because it will be found out. Like, what I mean by manipulation is if you say that you helped I don't know, increase 100% efficiency of XYZ. Like, that's manipulating information. And it will get found out. Essentially, if your company or your future employer finds out that truthfully the number was closer to 5% rather than that 100%, it's going to get you in trouble. And manipulating data or information or trying to manipulate people is always a bad idea. However, what we focus on is influencing behavior, persuasion. That is different. That will never, ever go out of style. And if you follow our advice at Salary Coaching, this is exactly what you'll get. The tools and tips and tricks so that you can maximize your ability to influence behavior just by virtue of being you. So, again, these first 7 seconds, what you're gonna do is you're going to influence their behavior. You're going to persuade them that, wow, this person is a diamond in the rough. What you're doing with the next section, which essentially encompasses your professional experience, your education, and your skills, what you want to do, because at this point they're kind of disengaged, right? I want you to give them brief instances of information that they can digest within like 1 to 2 seconds that allow them to create a framework around the information. So what you're trying to do is you're not going to give them too much information in each one of your experiences and professional background, but we're going into that in another episode. But you're wanting to do through your experience is just give them tiny little snippets that will allow Joe to make a broader picture, like to connect the dots in the way that you want him to connect them. All right. But again, we're feeding Joe's story. So you can't tell the story for him. He's going to have, like, we are the owners of our story. We are the hero. We can always have mentors in our stories, but we are the hero in our own journey. Nobody else can be the one who tells the story for us. So with that, throughout the next section, after those first 7 seconds, what you're doing is you're giving him the breadcrumbs to create a framework around the narrative that we're trying to build, right? Wow, this is a diamond in the rough. I can't believe this woman hasn't been hired yet. So we're creating information for him or her to connect the dots. Now, connecting the dots doesn't have to be an instant process, and it doesn't ever, it never actually only relies on your resume, right? There's all sorts of different tools and mechanisms that you also need to use to help corroborate these kind of little snippets of information so that he or she, or in this case Joe, can create that narrative in his story. So that's the next section. And then most people tend to just close their resume with education. And that is a bummer, because that, even if you created a good story, you didn't seal it. Like, even if you left all the breadcrumbs to Joe to finish up and kind of craft this could be a diamond in the rough story, you didn't seal it by personalizing it, by making you a 3D individual, like adding a dimension that removes you from just being another candidate on paper. And this is why I always make sure that the resumes that I touch have an about me section at the end. Because by the time that Joe has reached the last and final section, so the about me, by the time, if you're just doing it the way everybody else tells you to do it and have an education section, by the time Joe reaches that, he is so disengaged thinking about what he wants to have for lunch, or how is he going to arrange pickup for his kids or whatever. He's gone. He's so gone. He had an interesting experience with your resume, but he's gone. You lost him at this point. So we want to re-engage him, and the only way that we can possibly re-engage him at this point is by completely throwing him off guard. And how can you possibly do that if you're just on paper? By including an about me section. what do you do here? Well, again, that's a little bit more detail for another section. But essentially, if you bring out the part of you that is unknown to others, it's not professional. I want you to include something that really just is going to throw Joe off his rocker. He's going to be like, what? I had no idea that this person raises carnivorous plants, which, I mean, I've had some stories that are just awesome. Like a stamp collector whose oldest stamp is from, and this is one of the reasons why she started collecting stamps, was from this woman who sent a letter from the Titanic to her lover, or whatever it was, from the Titanic back in the day. So it's like this kind of stuff, you can't make it up, but it makes genuine people. It makes the human connection with Joe. If you can tell him something, even like something as boring as stamp collection, like the oldest stamp that I have is from blah blah blah, and it's from the Titanic, or came off the Titanic, whatever it was, and just make yourself that candidate. Like this one person who was hired at Google, I think like her passion or her about me talked about how she was into roller derby and what was it, accordion playing? Something along those lines. This other woman collected carnivorous plants because if someone gave her a carnivorous plant, she never knew what, like she'd never had one before, and then she was like, oh, these are kind of cute. So she started collecting them. Or it doesn't even have to be that elaborate. It can just be, I picked up running, or this one woman picked up Orange Theory, which is some sort of like a CrossFit exercise, because I was trying to get my friend to get healthy because she needed to lose 200 pounds. Well, after she lost the 200 pounds, I just got hooked and I wanted to keep doing Orange Theory. So what you're doing essentially with the About Me section is you're making Joe, like giving him kind of like a final punch, if you will. Like you're telling him like, holy cow, this person is really a person that not only can help us, but it's a person. It's not just a piece of paper. So what I want you to really take home is, if you can do that, if you can do that with your About Me section, you're no longer going to become that candidate that went to Harvard or went to whatever school. Even if they recognize the school, maybe they even went to the school, right? For me, as an undergrad, I went to Tufts University. So if someone says like, oh, and ends the resume with, oh, they went to Tufts, they immediately, in my mind, if I'm the hiring manager, will become the guy or the girl that went to Tufts. But in this case, if you add this section, you no longer become identified by an institution. You become identified and identifiable by a trait that you own, that you harness, and that is part of like the genuine you. And that, I can't even start explaining the level of influence that can have on making you the ideal candidate, because you no longer are the candidate that went to Harvard. You are now the candidate that does roller derby and plays the accordion. Like that just made you 3D in a way that an education can never ever do. All right, you guys, I gone a little bit over time, but I think this was super helpful. If you have any questions, any thoughts, send us a note, ask@salarycoaching.com. And if you need more tools and tips and tricks and freebies, etc., go check us out at salarycoaching.com.